The metal frame emerges from the ash like a skeleton from a grave, twisted and blackened by 22 years of weather and wildfire. Detective Sarah Chin stares at what remains of the Jameson family's RV, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she realizes she's looking at the answer to a question that has haunted 3 states for over 2 decades. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to rewind to a different kind of summer heat. July 15th, 1987, the morning sun beats down mercilessly on the asphalt of Jerry's Gas and Go, a lone outpost on Highway 101 where the California redwoods give way to Oregon's coastal range. Margaret Jameson adjusts the rearview mirror for the 3rd time, watching her husband Frank wrestle with the RV's temperamental awning while their 2 children bounce impatiently in the back seat. "Mom, can we get ice cream?" 8-year-old Katie calls out, her freckled nose pressed against the window. Her younger brother Danny, barely 6, echoes her plea with the persistence only small children can muster. "After we get gas, sweetheart," Margaret replies, though her voice carries a tension that has nothing to do with their cross-country adventure. She glances at the stack of letters on the dashboard, bills, mostly, with red stamps that scream "Final Notice" in bold letters. The family vacation was supposed to be a celebration of Frank's new job in Portland, a fresh start after months of financial strain. What the children don't know is that the job fell through 3 days ago. Frank slides into the driver's seat, sweat beading on his forehead despite the early hour. At 42, he still carries himself with the broad-shouldered confidence of his college football days. But Margaret notices how his hands shake slightly as he starts the engine. The weight of their secret sits between them like a third passenger. "Tanks. Full," he announces with forced cheerfulness. Next stop, Crater Lake. The RV pulls away from Jerry's Gas and Go at 8:47 a.m., captured by a security camera that will later become crucial evidence. Margaret waves at Jerry Kowalski, the station owner, who's already sweating through his coveralls as he prepares for another scorching day. It's the last confirmed sighting of the Jameson family alive. Highway 101 stretches ahead like a ribbon through towering evergreens, the kind of scenery that graces postcards and vacation brochures. The RV, a 1984 Winnebago Chieftain with distinctive blue racing stripes, handles the winding mountain roads with the grace of a boat in heavy seas. Frank keeps both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white as they navigate the increasingly narrow curves. "Tell me again about the lake," Danny says, crawling up to the front passenger seat where Margaret sits with a road atlas spread across her lap. "It's in the crater of an old volcano," she explains, running her fingers through his sandy hair. "The water is so blue and clear, you can see all the way to the bottom. What Margaret doesn't mention is the depth, nearly 2,000 feet of water, so cold and pristine that objects dropped into it are preserved indefinitely. It's a detail that will take on sinister significance in the weeks to come as they climb higher into the Cascade Mountains. The radio begins to crackle with static. Frank fiddles with the dial, catching fragments of weather reports and oldies. Stations before settling on a clear signal playing "Don't Stop Believin' by Journey." Katie and Danny sing along from the back, their voices mixing with the rumble of the RV's engine and the whisper of wind through the open windows. The music stops abruptly at 11:23 a.m. Margaret looks up from her atlas to see Frank's face has gone pale. Through the windshield, she spots what has captured his attention: a roadblock ahead, 2 Oregon State Police cruisers positioned across both lanes with their red and blue lights flashing lazily in the summer heat. "What do you think it is?" she whispers, though the children are too absorbed in their coloring books to notice the tension crackling between their parents. "Probably just checking for drunk drivers," Frank replies, but his voice lacks conviction. His hand moves instinctively to the glove compartment where Margaret knows he keeps their financial documents, the ones that tell the story of a man drowning in debt, desperate enough to consider options that would have been unthinkable just months ago. The RV slows to a stop behind a small line of vehicles. Through the side mirror, Margaret watches more cars accumulate behind them, trapping them in a growing queue of frustrated vacation traffic. A state trooper approaches their window, his uniform crisp despite the climbing temperature. "Good morning, folks," Officer Bradley Martinez says, his trained eye taking in the family scene before him. "Mind if I ask where you're headed today?" "Crater Lake," Frank responds, his salesman smile sliding into place with practiced ease. Family vacation. Officer Martinez nods, but something in his expression shifts as he studies Frank's face more carefully. His hand moves toward the radio clipped to his shoulder, a gesture so subtle that only Margaret notices it. Her breath catches in her throat as she recognizes the look. It's the same expression their bank manager wore when he told them about the foreclosure notice. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." The words hang in the air like smoke, and Margaret feels the world tilt beneath her. In the back seat, Katie looks up from her coloring book, sensing the change in atmosphere with the intuition children possess for adult distress. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" she asks, her small voice cutting through the mounting tension at Frank's. Hand tightens on the steering wheel, his knuckles going bone white. Through the windshield, Margaret sees more officers emerging from the patrol cars, their movements deliberate and coordinated. The roadblock suddenly looks less like a routine check and more like a carefully orchestrated trap. "Actually," Frank says, his voice barely above a whisper, "hold on tight, kids." The RV's engine roars to life as Frank floors the accelerator, tires squealing against hot asphalt as they burst through the roadblock gap before the officers can react. Margaret screams as they barrel past the patrol cars, Danny and Katie tumbling from their seats as the RV lurches violently to the left, plunging off Highway 101 into the dense wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. Behind them, police sirens wail, like banshees as the forest swallows the blue-striped Winnebago whole, beginning a mystery that will consume investigators for the next 22 years. The RV crashes through underbrush like a wounded animal, Frank wrestling with the steering. Willa's branches scrape against the windows with fingernails on chalkboard persistence. Pine needles and bark explode across the windshield as they careen down the steep embankment, the vehicle's suspension groaning under the punishment of rocks and fallen logs. "Frank, what are you doing?" Margaret screams, clutching the dashboard, as they bounce violently over a boulder. In the back, Katie and Danny have been thrown to the floor, their coloring books scattered like confetti around the cramped living space. "I can't go back," Frank shouts over the chaos, his face a mask of desperate determination. "You don't understand. I can't go back to prison." Prison. The word hits Margaret like a physical blow. In 10 years of marriage, Frank has never mentioned prison, never hinted at a past that would send state troopers after their family RV on a mountain highway. She stares at her husband, this stranger wearing Frank's face. As he navigates their home on wheels deeper into the wilderness, the sirens fade behind them, swallowed by the dense canopy of Douglas firs and towering redwoods. The forest here is older than memory, thick with the kind of silence that makes city dwellers nervous. Shafts of sunlight pierce the green darkness like searchlights, illuminating dust motes and tiny insects that dance in the golden beams. "Daddy, I'm scared." Danny whimpers from the floor, a thin line of blood trickling from his nose where he hit the kitchenette counter. Frank's eyes find his son in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, his expression cracks. "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's just taking a shortcut." But it's not okay, and they all know it. The RV wasn't designed for off-road adventures. Every bump and dip threatens to tear something vital loose from the undercarriage. Steam begins to rise from the hood as the engine temperature climbs into the red zone, and Margaret can smell the acrid scent of overheating metal and burning oil. 20 minutes into their unscheduled detour through hell, the forest floor levels out into a small clearing carpeted with wildflowers and surrounded by trees so tall they seem to scrape the sky. Frank brings the RV to a shuddering stop, the engine ticking and hissing like an angry snake as it begins to cool. The silence that follows is deafening. Margaret turns to face her husband, this man she thought she knew, this father of her children, who apparently carries secrets dark enough to send police cars in pursuit. "Who are you?" She whispers that Frank's hands remain gripped on the steering wheel, his knuckles still white despite their motionless state. When he finally speaks, his voice is hollow, distant. "My name isn't Frank Jameson." The admission hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Katie and Danny have climbed back onto the dinette bench, their wide eyes moving between their parents as they sense the tectonic shift occurring in their small world. "My real name is Francis Kozlowski. 23 years ago, I was convicted of armed robbery in Detroit. I served 8 years, got out, changed my name, Start it over. He finally releases the steering wheel, his hands shaking as he runs them through his graying hair. I thought I'd buried that life. I thought I was free. Margaret feels something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. The job in Portland. The financial problems. None of it was real, was it? The job was real. But when they ran the background check. Francis closes his eyes. Someone recognized my face from the old mug shots. The statute of limitations doesn't apply when you've been living under a false identity. Outside the RV, the forest seems to press closer, as if the trees themselves are eavesdropping on this family's unraveling. A red-tailed hawk circles overhead, its cry echoing through the clearing like a warning. So we're running, Margaret says, her voice flat with shock. We're actually running from the police. What choice do I have? If they take me back, I'll serve the full sentence plus time for identity fraud. That's 15 to 20 years, Margaret. Katie will be in college. Danny will be a grown man. I'll miss everything. For the first time since their wild plunge into the forest, Katie speaks up. Are we going to jail, Mommy? The question cuts through Margaret like a blade. She looks at her daughter, still clutching her box of crayons, a purple streak across her cheek where she'd been coloring when their world exploded, and feels something fundamental break inside her chest. No, sweetheart, you're not going anywhere. But even as she says the words, Margaret knows they're trapped. The RV's engine is likely damaged beyond their ability to repair it. They're miles from the nearest road, deep in wilderness that stretches for hundreds of square miles. The police will have helicopters in the air within hours, search teams with dogs combing the forest. Frank, she can't think of him as Francis yet, climbs out of the driver's seat and opens the door. The smell of pine and wildflowers drifts in, a sharp contrast to the mechanical odors of their overheated vehicle. I need to check the engine, he says. While he pops the hood and begins his diagnosis, Margaret gathers her children close. Katie's small body trembles against her side, while Danny sucks his thumb, a habit he'd abandoned months ago but has apparently rediscovered in crisis. Is Daddy a bad man? Katie whispers. The question tears at Margaret's heart because she doesn't know the answer. The man she married, the father who reads bedtime stories and builds blanket forts, seems incapable of armed robbery. But the man, who just fled from police through a forest, clearly has depths she never suspected. Daddy made some mistakes a long time ago, she says carefully. Before you were born. Before he met Mommy. Through the windshield, she watches Frank stare at the RV's smoking engine with the expression of a man watching his life dissolve. Steam continues to rise from the radiator, and even from her seat, Margaret can see the dark puddle of oil spreading beneath the chassis. How bad is it? She calls out. Frank looks up, his face grim. Cracked engine block. Busted radiator. We're not driving out of here. The implications hit her like a physical blow. No vehicle means no escape. No escape means capture is inevitable. And capture means Francis, goes to prison for the next 2 decades while she's left to explain to their children why Daddy isn't coming home. Unless they find another way to. Margaret's eyes drift to the small emergency backpack Frank insisted. They pack for the trip, water purification tablets, basic first aid supplies, a few energy bars. Enough for a day hike, maybe 2 if they stretched it. Not enough for a family of 4 to survive in the wilderness indefinitely. But as she watches her husband stare helplessly at their broken-down refuge, Margaret realizes they might not have a choice. The forest that had seemed so beautiful from the highway now feels like a living entity, watching them with ancient patience. Somewhere in the distance, she hears the faint thrum of helicopter rotors beginning their search, and she knows their time is running out. The helicopter's rhythmic thrum grows louder, its mechanical heartbeat echoing off the canyon walls like a predator's call. Margaret pulls Katie and Danny away from the windows as the aircraft passes overhead, its shadow sliding across their clearing like a dark omen. Through the pine canopy, she catches glimpses of white and orange, search and rescue colors that should bring comfort but instead fill her with dread. They're looking for us, Danny says with the matter-of-fact tone children use for observations that shatter adult worlds. Frank slams the RV's hood shut, his face streaked with grease and defeat. Engine's completely shot. Even if we had the parts, it'd take days to fix. He wipes his hands on his jeans, leaving dark smears across the denim. We need to move. They'll spot the RV from the air within the hour. Margaret's mind races through their impossible options. Stay with the vehicle and face inevitable capture. Venture into the wilderness with two small children and minimal supplies. Either choice feels like stepping off a cliff into darkness. Where exactly are we? She asks, unfolding the road atlas with trembling fingers. The map shows Highway 101 as a thin red line, threading through vast expanses of green, national forest, wilderness areas, and unmapped terrain that stretches for miles in every direction. Frank points to a spot roughly 15 miles east of the highway. Best guess, we're somewhere in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. Maybe 60 square miles of some of the most remote country in Oregon. His finger traces the topographical lines that indicate steep ridges and deep valleys. There are old mining trails up here, logging roads from the 30s. If we can find one that connects to a back road. He doesn't finish the sentence because they both know the odds. Two adults, two children, minimal supplies, and hostile terrain that has claimed experienced hikers with full gear and GPS devices. The Kalmiopsis is notorious for its sudden weather changes, hidden drop-offs, and disorienting maze of canyons that can trap travelers for days. But the helicopter is circling back, its rotor wash bending the treetops as it begins a systematic search pattern. They have minutes, not hours. Pack light, Frank says, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that Margaret recognizes from his sales presentations. Water first, then food. One change of clothes each. Leave everything else. Margaret moves through the RV like a woman in a trance, stuffing items into their small backpacks. She grabs the first aid kit, the water purification tablets, granola bars, and a handful of Katie's juice boxes. Her hands pause over the framed photo on the dinette table, their family portrait from last Christmas, all four of them smiling at the camera with the artificial joy that professional photographers coax from their subjects. The helicopter's sound intensifies as it hovers directly above their clearing. Now, Frank hisses. We go now. Margaret snatches the family photo and shoves it into her pack before gathering her children. Katie clutches her stuffed rabbit, a threadbare pink thing, named Mr. Whiskers that has been her constant companion since she was 3. Danny has somehow managed to grab his entire collection of Hot Wheels cars, the toy vehicles bulging from his small pockets. They slip out the RV's back door as the helicopter passes overhead, using the vehicle's bulk to shield them from aerial observation. The forest floor is spongy with decades of fallen needles, muffling their footsteps as they hurry toward the tree-line. Behind them, their abandoned home looks suddenly small and vulnerable in the clearing, a bright blue target that screams their presence to anyone looking down from above. Frank leads them into the shadows beneath towering Douglas firs, their trunks so massive that the entire family could hide behind a single tree. The understory is relatively clear. Decades of fallen needles have created a natural carpet that suppresses most ground vegetation. Shafts of sunlight pierce the canopy at sharp angles, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere that would be breathtaking under different circumstances. Where are we going, Daddy? Katie whispers, her small hand clutched tightly in Margaret's. Adventure, Frank replies, forcing brightness into his voice. We're going on the biggest adventure of our lives. They walk for 20 minutes in relative silence, the only sounds their muffled footsteps and the distant helicopter continuing its search pattern. Danny's toy cars jingle softly in his pockets with each step, a metallic percussion that seems impossibly loud in the forest quiet. Then Frank stops abruptly, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. Margaret strains her ears and catches it. Voices, distant but unmistakably human, calling through the trees with the organized cadence of a search team. Frank Jameson, this is Oregon State Police. We just want to talk. The voice echoes off the canyon walls, multiplying into a chorus of mechanical authority that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Frank's face goes white as he realizes how quickly they've been tracked down. There's a trail, he whispers, pointing to what Margaret can barely make out as a slight depression in the forest floor, probably carved by deer over countless seasons. We follow it up the ridge, stay off the main paths. But as they begin their climb, Margaret notices something that makes her blood run cold. Danny is lagging behind, his 6-year-old legs struggling with the uneven terrain. His breathing sounds harsh and labored, the same wheeze she remembers, from his bout with pneumonia last winter. "I'm tired, Mommy," he says, stopping to lean against a fallen log. His face is flushed despite the cool forest air, and when Margaret feels his forehead, it's warm with the beginning of fever. The voices below are getting closer, and Margaret can now make out the crack of branches as the search team pushes through the underbrush. Soon they'll find the RV, and then tracking 4 people through the forest will become a matter of following broken twigs and disturbed ground cover. Frank appears beside her, his eyes taking in Danny's condition with the quick assessment of a father who has spent countless nights monitoring sick children. "How bad? I don't know. Maybe just exhaustion, maybe something more." Margaret's voice carries the helpless fear that every parent knows, the terror of watching your child suffer. When you're powerless to help, the search voices are close enough now that they can distinguish individual words. Fresh tire tracks. Oil stains. They went this way. Frank makes a decision that will haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. He scoops Danny into his arms despite their need for speed, his son's small body looking fragile against his father's broad chest. "We keep moving," he says. "Whatever happens, we stay together." As they push deeper into the wilderness, following a ghost trail that may lead nowhere, Margaret glances back one last time at the clearing where their old life died. The helicopter hovers above the abandoned RV like a mechanical vulture, and she knows there's no going back to the woman she was this morning. The suburban mother who worried about grocery bills and parent-teacher conferences. That woman is gone. Forever, disappeared into the forest with the family she thought she knew. 3 hours into their flight from everything they've ever known, Danny's fever spikes. Margaret feels it radiating through his small body as Frank carries him up the increasingly treacherous deer trail, their son's breath coming in shallow gasps that fog in the cooling mountain air. The afternoon sun, which had seemed so brutal at the gas station this morning, now struggles to penetrate the thick canopy above them. "We need to stop," Margaret pants, her city-soft legs burning from the constant uphill climb. Behind them, the search voices have faded, but she knows it's only temporary. Police dogs will pick up their scent soon enough, and then their head start will evaporate like morning mist. Frank lowers Danny to a moss-covered boulder, his own breathing labored from carrying 40 pounds of sick child over terrain that challenges experienced hikers. Danny's eyes are glassy with fever, and when Margaret checks his pulse, it's rapid and thready. His temperature's climbing, she whispers, trying to keep the panic from her voice. In their frantic evacuation of the RV, she'd grabbed basic first aid supplies, but nothing for a serious illness. No thermometer, no fever reducer, no way to know if they're dealing with exhaustion or something more dangerous. Katie sits beside her brother, her small hand stroking his sweaty hair with the gentle instinct children show towards suffering. Is Danny going to be okay? The question hangs in the air like smoke, and Margaret realizes she doesn't know how to answer. In their suburban life, sick children meant pediatrician visits and prescription medications, and the comfortable assumption that modern medicine could fix whatever went wrong. Out here, with darkness falling and temperatures dropping, illness becomes something primitive and terrifying. Frank studies their surroundings with the methodical assessment of a man whose survival instincts are finally kicking in. They've climbed, perhaps 2 miles from the RV, following a ridge that offers occasional glimpses of the vast wilderness stretching in all directions. To the west, the last traces of their old life, Highway 101 and the civilization that travels it, disappear behind towering peaks. To the east, nothing but endless forest and the growing darkness of approaching night. "There's a clearing up ahead," he says, pointing to a gap in the trees about 50 yards uphill. "We can camp there, get a better view of our surroundings." Camp. The word sounds absurd applied to their desperate situation, but Margaret knows. He's right. Danny can't travel much further, and moving through unfamiliar forest and darkness is a recipe for disaster. They need shelter, warmth, and time to figure out their next move. The clearing turns out to be the remains of an old logging operation, flat ground scarred by machinery decades ago, but now softened by wildflowers and knee-high grass. A few rotting stumps provide natural seating, and the open sky offers a view of approaching storm clouds that had been hidden beneath the forest canopy. "Rain," Frank observes, studying the darkening western horizon. "Maybe an hour, maybe less." Margaret spreads their thin emergency blanket on the ground and helps Danny lie down. His fever seems to be breaking. His skin feels cooler, and his breathing has settled into a more regular rhythm. She allows herself a moment of relief before the larger reality crashes back down on her. They're fugitives now. Not just Frank, all of them. She's aided and abetted a felon's escape, taken her children into danger rather than surrendering to authorities. Even if Danny recovers, even if they somehow find their way out of this wilderness, she'll face criminal charges. The suburban mother who this morning worried about balancing checkbooks is now an accessory to her husband's crimes. "Tell me about Detroit," she says quietly, settling beside Frank as Katie tends to her brother with the fierce protectiveness of an older sister. Frank's jaw tightens, and for a moment she thinks he won't answer. When he finally speaks, his voice carries 23 years of buried shame. "I was 19. Stupid, broke, hanging with the wrong crowd." He picks up a piece of bark and turns it over in his hands, studying its texture as if it contains answers to questions he's never been able to ask. "We knocked over a convenience store. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. Just grab the money and run. But the owner pulled a gun, and my friend Jerry panicked." Jerry. Margaret remembers the gas station owner who waved goodbye to them this morning. A lifetime ago. She wonders if Frank chose that stop deliberately, drawn by the familiar name like a moth to flame. "Jerry shot the owner. I shot the owner." The words come out flat, emotionless, but Margaret sees how his hands shake as he tears the bark into smaller pieces. "Not to kill. I was aiming for his shoulder, trying to make him drop the gun. But I was 19 and scared, and my hands were shaking, and the bullet caught him in the chest." The forest seems to hold its breath around them. Even the evening birds have gone quiet, as if nature itself is listening to this confession. Did he? He lived. Spent 3 months in the hospital. But he lived. Frank's voice cracks slightly. "I've sent money to his family every year since I got out. Anonymous donations to help with his medical bills. It's part of why we've always been broke." The revelation hits Margaret like a physical blow. The financial struggles she'd attributed to Frank's poor business sense, the mounting bills and failed ventures. It was all connected to a 19-year-old's mistake that had echoed through their entire marriage. "The man at the gas station," she says suddenly. "Jerry, that's not a coincidence." Frank shakes his head. "I've been visiting him for years. Never let on who I was. Just another customer buying gas and convenience store coffee. But I needed to see that the money was helping, that I was making some kind of difference." Thunder rumbles in the distance as the storm approaches, and Margaret feels the first drops of rain on her skin. Danny stirs on the blanket, his fever finally breaking as sweat beads on his forehead. "Mommy." His voice is weak but clearer than it's been in hours. "I'm thirsty." Margaret helps him sit up and gives him small sips from their water bottle, rationing the precious liquid while calculating how long their supplies might last. 3 bottles of water, a handful of granola bars, and whatever rainwater they can collect. Enough for maybe 2 days if they're careful. The rain begins in earnest as darkness falls, turning their refuge into a cold, wet misery that chills them to the bone. They huddle together under the emergency blanket. For people who this morning were a normal suburban family and now find themselves fugitives in a wilderness that shows no mercy to the unprepared. But as Margaret holds her children close, listening to Frank's whispered plans for tomorrow's route deeper into the mountains, she makes a disturbing discovery. Despite the fear, despite the cold and wet and uncertain future, part of her feels more alive than she has in years. For the first time since their wedding day, she's seeing the real Frank, not the carefully constructed salesman persona, but the man beneath the facade. Flawed, damaged, but real in a way that makes her question everything she thought she knew about their life together. Lightning illuminates the clearing for a brief moment, and in that flash, Margaret sees something that makes her heart stop. Fresh footprints in the mud at the clearing's edge, human prints that are definitely not theirs, leading into the forest. Ahead of them, they are not alone in the wilderness. Margaret's whispered alarm cuts through the drumming rain like a blade. "Frank." The footprints. He follows her gaze to the mud at the clearing's edge, where lightning has illuminated the unmistakable impression of a boot's sole, recent enough that the rain hasn't yet washed away its definition. The tread pattern is deep and deliberate, made by someone who knows how to move through rough terrain. Could be a hiker, Frank whispers back, but his voice lacks conviction. The prints are too fresh, too purposeful for a casual wilderness enthusiast caught in the storm. Or police, Margaret counters, pulling Katie and Danny closer under their inadequate shelter. The emergency blanket provides little protection against the driving rain, and all four of them are shivering now, their body heat no match for the mountain storm. Frank studies the prints more carefully, using his phone's flashlight despite the risk of being spotted. The weak beam reveals a story written in mud and disturbed vegetation. Someone passed through this clearing within the last hour, moving with the steady pace of a person who knows exactly where they're going. The prints head north, he reports. Quietly. Whoever it is, they're not tracking us directly. Different route. But Margaret notices something else that makes her stomach clench with fresh fear. The footprints aren't alone. Scattered around them are smaller depressions in the soft earth, paw prints, she realizes, from what looks like a large dog. Search and rescue, she breathes. They have K-9 units. The implications hit them both simultaneously. Police dogs can track scent through rain, across miles of wilderness, following traces invisible to human searchers. Their head start means nothing against animals bred and trained for exactly this kind of pursuit. Danny whimpers in his sleep, his fever having broken, but his small body still racked with chills from the cold rain. Katie presses against Margaret's side, her stuffed rabbit clutched so tightly that the toy's fabric stretches at the seams. We can't stay here, Frank says, though they all know moving in darkness through unfamiliar terrain is dangerous. If they have dogs, they'll find us by morning. Danny's still sick, Margaret protests. He can barely walk, let alone hike through mountains in a storm. Frank's face, illuminated by occasional lightning flashes, shows the terrible calculus of their situation. Stay and face certain capture. Move and risk Danny's life, and all their lives, to terrain that has killed experienced outdoorsmen. There's another option, he says finally, his voice so quiet she has to strain to hear him over the rain. I could surrender, turn myself in, let you and the kids go home. The suggestion hangs between them like a bridge neither wants to cross. Margaret knows it's the logical choice, the safe choice. Their children could return to their normal lives, traumatized but unharmed. She could rebuild, start over, maybe even move somewhere Frank's past wouldn't follow them. But looking at her husband's face in the lightning-strobed darkness, she realizes she's not ready to lose him. Not to 20 years in prison, not to a system that will brand him a career criminal for a mistake he made as a teenager. The man who sent anonymous money to his victim's family, who reads bedtime stories and built their children's swing set with patient hands, that man deserves a chance at redemption. No, she says firmly. We stay together. Whatever happens, we're a family. Frank's eyes fill with tears he tries to hide from the children. Margaret, you don't understand what you're saying. If we're caught, you'll face charges too. Aiding and abetting, child endangerment. I understand perfectly. She reaches for his hand, finding it cold and trembling in the rain. I married you for better or worse. This is worse. A sound cuts through the storm, distant but unmistakable. The deep, resonant baying of tracking dogs, still miles away but closing the distance with methodical precision. The dogs have found their scent trail, and now it's only a matter of time. We move, Frank decides, helping Danny to his feet despite the boys' protests. There's an old mining road marked on the map, maybe 3 miles north. If we can reach it, we might find better shelter. They pack their meager supplies in darkness, the rain making everything slippery and twice as difficult. Margaret stuffs the emergency blanket into her pack while Frank helps Danny into his small backpack, the boys' Hot Wheels cars creating a metallic symphony with each movement. It's like music, Katie observes, trying to find something positive in their desperate situation. Danny's cars are making rain music. The observation strikes Margaret as profoundly sad. Her 8-year-old daughter trying to transform terror into wonder, finding beauty in the sound of toy cars while her family flees through a wilderness that could kill them all. They leave the clearing single file, Frank leading with their only flashlight, followed by the children, with Margaret bringing up the rear. The deer trail they'd followed up the ridge has become a muddy stream, forcing them to pick their way carefully over rain-slicked rocks and fallen branches. Danny stumbles repeatedly, his illness and exhaustion making every step a struggle. Frank finally gives up on making progress and simply carries his son, accepting that their pace will be measured in hundreds of yards rather than miles an hour into their night march. They discover they're not following a deer trail at all. Frank stops abruptly, his flashlight beam revealing something that makes them all freeze in terror. Cut into a massive Douglas fir beside the path, barely visible beneath decades of bark growth, are symbols carved deep into the wood. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks, crude letters and numbers that spell out a message in the fading light. Mine 7. Danger. Keep out. Below the warning, carved in fresher wood, are initials. JR 1985. Someone's been here recently, Margaret whispers, studying the newer carving. 2 years ago. Frank plays his light along the trail ahead, revealing what they'd missed in their desperate flight from the clearing. This isn't a natural deer path. It's a man-made trail, carved by miners seeking gold in these mountains decades ago. The path is too straight, too carefully graded, engineered by people who needed to move heavy equipment through impossible terrain. Mine 7. Frank reads aloud. That means there are at least 6 others. The implications are staggering. They're not just lost in wilderness. They're walking into a network of abandoned mining operations, shafts and tunnels that could collapse without warning, underground chambers that might contain poisonous gases or unstable explosives left behind by long-dead prospectors. But behind them, growing steadily closer, the tracking dogs continue their relentless pursuit. The baying has become more frequent, more excited, as the animals close the distance on their quarry. We keep going, Frank decides, though his voice betrays his fear. Whatever's ahead can't be worse than what's behind us. As they push deeper into the mining district, following a trail that may lead to safety or death, Margaret makes a disturbing discovery. The rain has stopped, but the sudden silence isn't comforting. Instead, it feels ominous, as if the forest itself is holding its breath before some terrible revelation. And then she hears it, a sound that makes her blood freeze in her veins. Not the baying of search dogs or the distant thrum of helicopters, but something else entirely. A low, mechanical grinding noise echoing from somewhere ahead of them, as if ancient machinery has suddenly sprung to life deep in the abandoned mines. Someone, or something, is waiting for them in the darkness ahead. The mechanical grinding grows louder as they approach what remains of Mine 7, a gaping wound in the mountainside that exhales cold, stale air like the breath of something long dead. Frank's flashlight beam reveals the skeletal remains of mining infrastructure, rotted timber supports, rusted rails that once carried or cars, and the dark mouth of a tunnel that disappears into the mountain's heart. But it's what they don't see that terrifies Margaret most. The grinding sound has stopped abruptly, as if their approach triggered some automatic shutdown. The silence that follows feels hostile, pregnant with the presence of something that doesn't want to be discovered. Hello. Frank calls softly into the darkness, his voice echoing off unseen stone walls. Is someone there? The only response is the drip of water somewhere deep in the mine shaft, a rhythmic percussion that counts out seconds like a metronome marking time until their capture. Behind them, the tracking dog's baying has grown closer. Maybe an hour away, maybe less. Danny shivers in Frank's arms, his fever having returned with the night's chill. I don't like this place, Daddy, he whispers. It smells scary. He's right. The air carries the metallic tang of rusted iron mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant that makes Margaret's stomach turn. It's the smell of a place where things have died and been left to rot in darkness. There, Katie says suddenly, pointing past the mine entrance to a structure they'd missed in their initial survey. Built into the hillside like a bunker, camouflaged with decades of plant growth, stands what looks like an old mining office or storage building. Unlike the timber supports at the mine mouth, this structure appears solid, weatherproof, and occupied at a thin line of light seeps from beneath a door that someone has obviously maintained, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifts from a chimney that Margaret hadn't noticed until now. Someone lives here, in this forgotten corner of the wilderness, far from roads or civilization or any human contact. Frank sets Danny down carefully and approaches the building with his hands visible, trying to project non-threatening intentions. Despite their desperate circumstances. Hello? We're not here to cause trouble. We just need help. The door opens so suddenly that Frank stumbles backward, his flashlight beam catching the figure that emerges from the warm interior. Margaret's breath catches in her throat as she takes in their unexpected host. The man is perhaps 60, with the lean, weathered build of someone who's spent decades in physical labor. His hair is long and gray, pulled back in a ponytail that emphasizes the sharp angles of his face. But it's his eyes that hold Margaret's attention, pale blue and startlingly intelligent, studying their bedraggled family with the careful assessment of someone who's survived by trusting no one. "You're the ones they're looking for," he says without preamble. His voice carries the trace of an accent Margaret can't identify, maybe Eastern European, softened by years in America. Frank's hand moves instinctively toward Margaret and the children, a protective gesture that doesn't go unnoticed by their host. "We haven't done anything wrong. You ran from police roadblock this morning. Abandoned RV about 5 miles southeast. Family of 4. Father, mother, 2 children." The man recites their situation with the precision of someone who's been monitoring law enforcement communications. "Dogs will be here within the hour." The casual accuracy of his knowledge sends chills down Margaret's spine. This isn't a chance encounter with a helpful hermit. This man has been tracking their progress, listening to police radio traffic, waiting for them to arrive at his doorstep. "Who are you?" she asks, stepping slightly in front of Katie and Danny. The man's pale eyes study her for a long moment before he responds. "Name is Joseph Kovar. Been living up here for 15 years. Before that," he shrugs. "Before that is before that." Another fugitive, Margaret realizes. Someone else running from a past that won't let go, hiding in the wilderness, while the world moves on without him. The recognition passes between Frank and Joseph like a current of understanding. "The police," Frank says. "How long do we have?" 30 minutes, maybe 40 if the rain slowed them down. Joseph steps aside, gesturing toward the warmth of his cabin. "You want to stay warm while they arrest you? Or you want to disappear?" The question hangs in the air like smoke. Margaret looks at her children, Danny burning with fever, Katie clutching her rabbit and trying not to cry, and knows they've reached the point where all their choices lead to disaster. "Disappear how?" Frank asks. Joseph's smile reveals teeth, stained by years of coffee and tobacco. "These mountains are full of old mines. Shafts that go down 100 feet or more. Government maps show maybe half of them. I know them all." He leads them inside his cabin, which proves to be far more sophisticated than its exterior suggests. Solar panels power LED lighting, a wood stove provides heat, and shelves lined with canned goods suggest someone who's prepared for long-term isolation. But it's the radio equipment that catches Margaret's attention: multiple transceivers, antenna arrays, and what looks like military-grade communication gear. "You've been listening to the search," she says. "I listen to everything. FBI, state police, search and rescue. Amazing what people say when they think nobody's paying attention." Joseph moves to a large map mounted on the cabin wall, its surface covered with colored pins and hand-drawn notations. "Your husband's real name is Francis Kozlowski. Detroit robbery, 1962. Served 8 years. Disappeared after release." Frank's face goes white. "How do you?" "Because I make it my business to know who walks into my territory." Joseph's finger traces a route on the map that leads deeper into the mountains. "Question is, you want to keep running, or you want to disappear permanently?" The distinction chills Margaret to the bone. Running suggests eventual capture. Disappearing suggests something far more final. Outside, the tracking dog's baying has become urgent, excited. They've found the scent trail leading to the mine, and their handlers won't be far behind. "There's a way," Joseph continues, his voice taking on the tone of someone revealing a carefully guarded secret. "Network of caves and abandoned shafts that connect to the old logging roads on the far side of the range. Takes about 6 hours if you know the route. Comes out near the California border." "And if we don't know the route?" Margaret asks. Joseph's pale eyes fix on hers. "Then you join the others who tried." The casual reference to others, people who presumably died attempting this underground escape route, makes Margaret's blood run cold. But the sound of approaching dogs eliminates any time for debate. "We'll guide you," Joseph says, reaching for a heavy backpack that's obviously been prepared for exactly this situation. "But once we go into the deep mines, There's no coming back. You understand? The people you were this morning, they stay buried down there forever. Through the cabin's window, Margaret sees the first flicker of flashlight beams approaching through the trees. The search team has found their trail, and in minutes, this refuge will be surrounded. Frank looks at his family, his sick son, his terrified daughter, his wife who's already sacrificed everything for his freedom, and makes the choice that will haunt them all. We go down. Joseph moves with the efficiency of someone who's rehearsed this scenario countless times. He extinguishes the cabin's lights, shoulders his heavy pack, and leads them through a back door Margaret hadn't noticed. A concealed exit that opens directly onto the mine entrance. Stay close, he whispers, producing a powerful headlamp that cuts through the darkness like a sword. The first 100 yards are unstable. After that, we follow the old rail line down to level 3. The mine entrance swallows them like the mouth of some prehistoric beast. Margaret's last glimpse of the outside world shows flashlight beams converging on Joseph's cabin, voices calling for the family to surrender peacefully. Then they're inside, surrounded by walls of living rock that seem to press closer with each step. The smell hits her immediately: damp stone, rusted metal, and something else that makes her gag. The scent of death, old and persistent, as if the mountain itself is rotting from within. "Daddy, I can't see," Danny whimpers, his small voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Frank adjusts their single flashlight to provide a wider beam, revealing the mine's interior in stark detail. Ancient timber supports lean at dangerous angles. They're wood black with age and moisture. Rusted mining equipment sits abandoned where workers left it decades ago, picks and shovels and/or cars that will never again see daylight. But it's the bones that make Margaret stumble. Scattered along the tunnel floor, bleached white by time and underground moisture, are the skeletal remains of small animals, and some that clearly aren't animals at all. A human skull grins from a crevice in the rock wall, its empty sockets reflecting Joseph's headlamp like black mirrors. "Welcome to the graveyard," Joseph says matter-of-factly. "People have been disappearing in these mines for 80 years. Cave-ins, toxic gases, getting lost in tunnels that go on for miles. Mountain keeps their secrets." Katie presses against Margaret's leg, her stuffed rabbit providing inadequate comfort against the horror surrounding them. "Mommy, I want to go home." Home. The word seems to belong to another universe, a place where families worry about homework and household chores instead of skeletal remains and pursuing police dogs. Margaret realizes that home, their real home, died the moment Frank gunned the RV through that roadblock. They follow Joseph deeper into the mine, their footsteps echoing off stone walls that seem to absorb sound and light with equal hunger. The tunnel branches repeatedly, creating a maze that would confuse even experienced spelunkers. Joseph navigates without hesitation, following mental maps carved by 15 years of solitary exploration. "How do you know where you're going?" Frank asks, his voice tight with claustrophobic anxiety. "Practice," Joseph replies cryptically. "Brought others through here before. Some made it, some didn't." The casual reference to previous escapes and failures sends fresh chills through Margaret's already terrified system. She's beginning to understand that Joseph isn't just a helpful hermit. He's running some kind of underground railroad for fugitives, guiding desperate people through passages that may lead to freedom or death. 20 minutes into their descent, they reach what Joseph calls Level 3, a wider tunnel that obviously served as a main transportation route when the mine was operational. Rusted rails run down the center of the passage, and the walls show evidence of more sophisticated engineering than the rough-hewn entrance tunnel. "Rest here," Joseph says, setting down his pack beside a relatively dry section of wall. "Children need water, and you need to understand what comes next." They huddle together in the pale circle of light provided by their combined flashlights, sharing precious water and trying to ignore the oppressive weight of millions of tons of rock above their heads. Danny's fever seems to be stabilizing, but he's still weak and disoriented by their underground journey. Joseph produces a hand-drawn map from his pack, its surface covered with detailed notations and danger warnings. "From here, we have two choices. Safe route takes 12 hours, comes out near a logging road about 30 miles from the California border. But it's slow, and if the police bring dogs into the mine, he doesn't need to finish." Underground, with limited air circulation and no escape routes, they'd be trapped like animals in a cage. What's the other option? Frank asks, though his tone suggests he already knows he won't like the answer. Fast route. For hours through the deep tunnels, but it's dangerous. Part of the passage flooded in the spring rains. You'll be swimming underground in water that's maybe 40 degrees. No way to know how deep or how far. Swimming. Underground. In near-freezing water with two small children, one of whom is already weakened by illness. Margaret feels panic rising in her throat like bile. People have made it, she asks. Some, Joseph acknowledges. Others. He gestures toward a section of the map marked with red X's. Currents strong down there. Pull you into side passages, hold you under until you drown. Bodies wash up sometimes in the lower levels. The choice before them is impossible. Take the safe route and risk capture by police dogs in a confined space where surrender means certain prison time for Frank and criminal charges for Margaret. Take the fast route and risk death by drowning in underground chambers that have claimed previous escapees. But above them, muffled by hundreds of feet of rock, comes a sound that eliminates their ability to choose. The deep, resonant baying of tracking dogs, echoing down the mine shaft as the search team brings their K-9 units underground. They're in the mine, Frank says unnecessarily. Joseph nods grimly. Dogs can track scent even down here. Maybe an hour before they reach this level. An hour to reach the flooded passage, navigate whatever underwater hell awaits them, and emerge on the other side before hypothermia or drowning claims them all. With two children who can barely swim and one adult, Margaret, who's never been comfortable in deep water. The fast route, Frank decides, his voice carrying the flat finality of a man who's accepted that all their choices lead to disaster. Joseph begins repacking his gear with mechanical precision. Strip down to underwear. Clothes will drag you under. Put everything else in plastic bags, phones, documents, anything you want to keep dry. As Margaret helps Katie and Danny remove their clothes in the cold, damp tunnel, she catches sight of something that makes her heart stop. Carved into the rock wall beside them, almost invisible in the flickering light, are scratches that look like tally marks. Dozens of them, grouped in sets of 5 days, she realizes. Someone was trapped down here long enough to count days. Joseph, she whispers, pointing to the marks. What are those? His pale eyes follow her gesture, and for the first time since they met him, his confident facade cracks slightly. Reminder, he says quietly. Sometimes the fast route isn't fast enough. Behind them, growing closer, the tracking dogs continue their pursuit through passages that offer no mercy to the desperate or the lost. The flooded passage greets them like the mouth of an underground river, black water reflecting their headlamps in fractured patterns that hurt to look at directly. Joseph's light reveals a tunnel that disappears beneath the surface after about 20 feet, the water level too high to walk through, but potentially passable for strong swimmers willing to risk everything. Current flows toward the exit, Joseph explains, his voice echoing strangely off the water's surface. Let it carry you, but watch for side passages. Get pulled into one of those, and you'll never find your way back to the main tunnel. Margaret stares at the inky water, her throat constricting with terror. She's a weak swimmer under the best circumstances, pool parties and family vacations where the greatest danger was sunburn. This underground river, fed by mountain runoff and containing unknown depths, represents a level of mortal peril she's never imagined. How deep? Frank asks, though his question sounds more like a prayer than an inquiry. Varies. 20 feet in. Some places, maybe 5 in others. You won't know until you're in it. Joseph strips down to thermal underwear that suggests he's made this journey before. Most important thing, don't panic. Water's cold enough to trigger shock response. Your body will want to hyperventilate, make you think you're drowning even when you're not. Katie looks at the black water with the wide-eyed terror of a child who's just realized that adults don't actually have all the answers. Mommy, I can't swim that far. The admission hits Margaret like a physical blow. Katie can paddle around in their backyard pool, but this underground river demands skills and endurance far beyond an 8-year-old's capabilities. Danny, still weak from fever, would drown within minutes of entering the water. The children ride, Joseph says, producing what looks like a deflatable life vest from his pack. I carry the boy. Your husband carries the girl. You swim between us. Help if someone gets in trouble. The plan sounds insane. 3 adults and 2 children navigating an underground river system in near-total darkness, guided only by waterproof headlamps and the hope that the current won't drag them into side passages that lead nowhere. But behind them, growing steadily closer, the tracking dogs continue their relentless pursuit. The baying has become more excited, more focused, as the animals follow their scent trail deeper into the mine. Soon the dogs will reach level 3, and then their underground refuge will become a trap. They enter the water one by one, gasping as the cold hits their nearly naked bodies like liquid ice. Margaret's muscles seize involuntarily, her nervous system screaming warnings that this environment will kill her. The water is so cold it burns, stealing breath and strength with each passing second. Jesus Christ, Frank gasps, lifting Katie onto his shoulders where she clings with desperate intensity. How long do we have to stay in here? 20 minutes if the current's with us, Joseph replies, securing Danny against his chest with practiced efficiency. Longer if we hit obstacles. 20 minutes in water cold enough to cause hypothermia in healthy adults. 20 minutes with 2 terrified children depending on their parents' failing strength. 20 minutes to cross an underground river that has claimed previous escapees whose bones probably litter the tunnel floor somewhere beneath their feet. They begin swimming downstream, letting the current carry them while fighting to maintain position in the center of the tunnel. Joseph's headlamp cuts through the darkness ahead, revealing occasional glimpses of stone walls that seem to press closer with each passing yard. The cold is worse than Margaret imagined. Within 5 minutes, her fingers are numb and her breathing has become labored. The children's whimpering echoes off the tunnel walls, a sound that tears at her heart, but also drives her forward through water that feels like liquid nitrogen. Side passage, Joseph calls out, his voice distorted by the acoustics of their liquid cave. Stay left. Current's stronger there. Margaret kicks desperately toward the left wall, her waterlogged body responding sluggishly to commands from a brain that's beginning to shut down non-essential functions. She can feel hypothermia setting in, the mental fog, the loss of fine motor control, the overwhelming urge to just stop fighting and let the water take her. But Katie's frightened sobs from Frank's shoulders keep her moving. Her daughter needs her mother to be strong, to navigate this underwater hell and emerge on the other side where they can be a family again. Whatever that means now. 10 minutes into their swim, disaster strikes. Frank's strength gives out without warning. One moment, he's swimming strongly with Katie clinging to his neck. The next, he's thrashing in the water as his hypothermia-weakened muscles refuse to respond. Katie screams as her father disappears beneath the surface, his headlamp creating an eerie glow in the depths below. Frank. Margaret dives after them, her own exhausted body protesting as she forces herself deeper into the freezing water. Her lungs burn as she fights against the current, searching for any sign of her husband and daughter in the liquid darkness. She finds them tangled in what feels like old mining cable, Frank's unconscious body dragging Katie toward the bottom of the tunnel. Margaret grabs her daughter's arm and kicks toward the surface, her vision going gray from oxygen deprivation and cold. They break the surface, gasping and choking, Katie coughing up water while Frank floats face down beside them. Margaret flips him over and sees his lips have gone blue, his eyes rolled back to show only whites. He's not breathing, she screams to Joseph, who's fighting the current to reach them while keeping Danny above water. Joseph arrives with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's dealt with emergencies in impossible conditions. He tilts Frank's head back, pinches his nose, and begins mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while treading water in the underground river. After what feels like hours but is probably only seconds, Frank coughs up a lungful of water and begins breathing again. His eyes focus slowly on Margaret's face, confusion and terror warring in his expression. Katie, he gasps. I'm here, Daddy. She sobs, clinging to Margaret with strength that threatens to drag them both under. Current's getting stronger, Joseph warns. We need to move. Exit's close, but if we miss it, he doesn't need to finish. Miss their exit point, and the current will carry them deeper into the mountain's flooded heart, into passages that may have no air pockets or exit routes. They'll drown in darkness, their bodies joining the others who've made this desperate journey and failed. Margaret looks ahead into the black water, her family's survival depending on the next few minutes, and realizes that even if they reach the exit alive, they'll emerge as different people. The suburban mother who worried about grocery bills died somewhere in that freezing water. What emerges on the other side will be something harder, something forged by desperation and the terrible knowledge that love sometimes demands the impossible. The exit materializes from the darkness like salvation itself, a ledge of dry stone barely wide enough for two people, carved from living rock by miners who never imagined it would serve as a lifeline for desperate fugitives. Joseph hauls himself up first, then reaches down to pull Danny from the water, the boy's lips blue and his small body shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Margaret pushes Katie up to Joseph's waiting hands before struggling onto the ledge herself, her muscles cramping from 23 minutes in water cold enough to kill. Frank emerges last, moving with the clumsy motions of someone whose nervous system is shutting down from cold and exhaustion. They collapse together on the stone platform, gasping and shivering in air that feels warm by comparison to the underground river they've just survived. But their relief is short-lived. Joseph is already moving, pulling dry clothes in emergency. Blankets from waterproof bags with the urgency of someone who knows hypothermia can kill even after you've reached safety. Get them dressed, he orders, wrapping Danny in a thermal blanket. We have maybe 10 minutes before body temperature drops too low. Margaret's fingers are too numb to work buttons or zippers, so she simply holds Katie while Joseph and Frank struggle to get the children into dry clothes. Danny's breathing is shallow and irregular, his skin so pale it's almost translucent in the beam of their headlamps. Is he going to be okay? She whispers, watching her son's chest rise and fall with alarming irregularity. Don't know, Joseph admits with brutal honesty. Seen adults die from less exposure. Children are tougher sometimes, but he leaves the sentence unfinished, but Margaret understands. They've traded one form of mortal peril for another. Even if Danny survives the hypothermia, they're still miles from anything resembling civilization, with no vehicle, no shelter, and no clear plan beyond staying ahead of the police. As sensation returns to her extremities in painful waves, Margaret becomes aware of their surroundings. They're in a natural cave system now, carved by water over geological time rather than blasted by human hands. The walls curve gracefully. Overhead, and somewhere in the distance, she can hear the whisper of moving air that suggests a connection to the surface. How much farther? Frank asks through chattering teeth. 2 hours if we push hard. Less if we're lucky. Joseph shoulders his pack and checks his watch, a waterproof military model that's apparently survived countless underground expeditions. But we need to move. Search teams will figure out the water route eventually. The thought of police divers following their desperate swim through the flooded tunnel makes Margaret's stomach clench. But Joseph is right. They've bought time, not freedom. The chase will continue until they reach somewhere beyond the reach of dogs and helicopters and the implacable machinery of law enforcement. They begin walking deeper into the cave system, following what Joseph claims is a natural tunnel that connects to the surface near the California border. The children walk between their parents, still wrapped in emergency blankets that rustle with each step like whispered prayers. The caves are beautiful in their way. Flowstone formations that look like frozen waterfalls, delicate limestone curtains that chime musically when disturbed by their passage. Under different circumstances, Margaret might have found wonder in this hidden world. Now, exhausted and terrified, she sees only another form of prison, another obstacle between her family and whatever safety might exist beyond these mountains. An hour into their underground march, Danny collapses. One moment, he's walking steadily beside Katie. The next, he's crumpled on the cave floor, his small body convulsing as fever and hypothermia wage war in his failing system. Margaret drops too, her knees beside him, her hands searching for pulse points that feel thread-like and irregular. He's burning up, she tells Frank, though the contradiction makes no sense. How can a child suffering from hypothermia suddenly spike a fever? Joseph kneels beside them, his pale eyes reflecting genuine concern for the first time since they met him. Bodies fighting too many battles. Cold, infection, exhaustion. Sometimes the system just shuts down. The clinical assessment hits Margaret like a physical blow. Her 6-year-old son, who this morning was excited about seeing Crater Lake, who collected toy cars and believed his father was a traveling salesman, is dying in a cave beneath an Oregon mountain because she chose family loyalty over common sense. There's a ranger station, Joseph says quietly, maybe 3 miles through the surface route. Radio, medical supplies, helicopter landing pad for evacuations. The unspoken suggestion hangs between them like a bridge they're afraid to cross. Save Danny's life by surrendering their freedom. Watch their son die rather than face the consequences of Frank's past. I'll carry him, Frank says, scooping Danny into his arms despite his own exhaustion. We finish this. All of us. But Margaret sees something in her husband's eyes that makes her heart break. The terrible recognition that their desperate flight might cost them the very thing they were trying to protect. Their family could emerge from these caves irrevocably broken. Danny's death a weight that would crush whatever love survived their ordeal. As they push through the final miles of cave system, Danny's condition deteriorates with frightening speed. His breathing becomes labored, then sporadic. His skin takes on a grayish pallor that Margaret recognizes from her grandmother's final days in the hospital. Mommy, Katie whispers, is Danny going to heaven? The question stops Margaret cold. In their suburban life, death was something that happened to other people. Elderly relatives, characters in movies, abstract concepts that didn't touch their daily reality. Now her daughter is asking about her brother's mortality while they flee through underground passages toward an uncertain future. Danny's going to be fine, Margaret lies, because sometimes love requires deception. But when they finally emerge from the caves into dawn light that seems impossibly bright after hours in darkness, Danny is unconscious in Frank's arms, his breathing so shallow it's barely perceptible. They stand at the edge of a logging road that stretches toward distant mountains, freedom tantalizingly close. Behind them, the cave mouth yawns like the entrance to another world, the underground realm where the Jameson family died and something harder was born. Joseph points toward a column of smoke rising from the forest about 2 miles ahead. Ranger station. Radio, medical supplies. You could have help here in 30 minutes. Frank looks at his unconscious son, then at Margaret, then at Katie, who's staring at her brother with the terrible understanding that sometimes grown-ups can't fix everything that goes wrong. What do we do? He whispers. And Margaret realizes that 22 years later, when investigators find their burned RV in a forest clearing, this will be the moment that determined everything that followed. The choice between love and freedom, between family and survival, between the people they were and whoever they might become. Margaret takes Danny from Frank's trembling arms, feeling her son's life flickering like a candle in wind. His breathing has become so shallow she has to press her ear to his chest to detect the faint rhythm of his heart. The choice before them crystallizes with brutal clarity: surrender and save their son, or continue running and watch him die in her arms. The ranger station, she says firmly. We turn ourselves in. Frank's face crumples with defeat and relief. Margaret, if we do this, I know. She kisses Danny's fevered forehead, tasting salt and the metallic tang of approaching death. I know what it means. They begin walking toward the distant smoke, their family procession moving with the solemnity of mourners. Katie holds Margaret's free hand, her stuffed rabbit dragging in the dirt behind them. Joseph follows at a distance, his pale eyes reflecting something that might be respect. But as they crest a small hill, the ranger station comes into view, and Margaret sees something that changes everything. The building is dark, abandoned. The smoke they've been following rises from a campfire beside the road, where 2 men in civilian clothes sit drinking coffee from metal cups. Not park rangers, not search and rescue. Bounty hunters. Joseph grabs Margaret's arm, pulling the family back behind the tree line before they can be spotted. Freelancers, he whispers. Police put out a reward. $20,000 for information leading to your arrest. The revelation hits Margaret like ice water. Their desperate flight through the wilderness, their near-death experience in the flooded mine, Danny's critical condition, all of it meaningless if bounty hunters are waiting at every possible exit point. How many others? Frank asks. Assume they're everywhere. Every road, every trail, every place you might surface. Joseph studies the camp through military-grade binoculars. These mountains are crawling with people who want that reward money. Danny's breathing hitches, and Margaret feels his small body convulse against her chest. They're running out of time, but surrendering to bounty hunters offers no guarantee of medical care. These men want the reward, not Danny's survival. There's another way, Joseph says quietly, but it costs everything. He leads them deeper into the forest, following what appears to be a natural game trail, but proves to be another carefully maintained escape route. 20 minutes of hiking brings them to a clearing where the remains of an old cabin sit, surrounded by the blackened stumps of trees burned in some long-ago wildfire. "Welcome to the end of the line," Joseph announces. Inside the cabin's stone foundation, hidden beneath decades of forest debris, is a root cellar that's been converted into something resembling a fallout shelter. Solar panels charge a bank of batteries, water pumps draw from an underground spring, and shelves lined with medical supplies suggest someone prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. "How long have you been planning this?" Margaret asks as Joseph produces a portable defibrillator and begins checking Danny's vital signs. 15 years. Ever since I realized the only way to truly disappear is to die." His pale eyes meet hers with unsettling intensity. "Question is, are you ready to let the Jameson family die so something else can be born?" The answer comes in stages, like a slowly dawning horror. Fake death certificates, forged identification documents, a network of people who've chosen to vanish completely rather than face whatever pursuit drove them into these mountains. Others have done it. Dozens. Man from Phoenix who embezzled pension funds. Woman from Seattle who witnessed a murder and refused to testify. Couple from Portland who lost their children to social services. Joseph's voice carries the weight of accumulated secrets. They all chose death over capture. Over the next 6 hours, as Joseph works to stabilize Danny's condition with fluids and antibiotics from his medical stockpile, Margaret watches her family's old identities die. Their fingerprints are altered with controlled chemical burns. Their hair is cut and dyed. Photos are taken for documents that will emerge from printing equipment hidden deeper in the underground facility. The children sleep through most of it, exhausted beyond the point of caring about adult machinations. But when Danny finally opens, his eyes, fever-broken, breathing regular, he looks at Margaret with confusion that breaks her heart. "Mommy, why do you look different?" "Because I'm not your mommy anymore," she wants to say. "Because the woman who worried about grocery bills and parent-teacher conferences died in a flooded mine shaft. Because sometimes love requires the ultimate sacrifice. We're playing a game," she says instead. "A game where we get to be new people." 3 days later, the Jameson family's RV is discovered by wildfire fighters in a forest clearing 60 miles from where they actually abandoned it. Joseph's people have moved it there, staged it to look like the family died in the blaze that swept through that section of wilderness 2 years earlier. The burned metal frame, twisted by heat and weather, tells a story of tragic accident rather than desperate flight. Search teams find no bodies, but the wilderness has claimed enough victims over the decades that absence of remains isn't unusual. Wild animals, flash floods, and the simple passage of time can erase human evidence completely. Detective Sarah Chun, investigating the cold case 22 years later, will stare at that twisted metal frame and wonder how a family could simply vanish. The official report will list them as presumed dead, victims of a wildfire that occurred while they were camping in restricted wilderness. But Margaret knows the truth. The Jameson family did die in those mountains. What emerged were the Hendersons, Thomas and Patricia Henderson, with their children Sarah and Michael. New identities, new histories, new lives built on the foundation of perfect disappearance. They settle in a small town in Northern California, where Thomas Henderson works as a carpenter and Patricia runs a small bookstore. The children grow up, believing their parents met in college, that their family history begins with their earliest memories of life in a community that accepts newcomers without asking too many questions. Danny, now Michael, never remembers his fevered near-death experience in the underground shelter. Katie, now Sarah, sometimes dreams of a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers, but the dreams fade as childhood gives way to adolescence. Only Margaret and Frank carry the weight of what they've sacrificed. Late at night, when the children are asleep, and the house is quiet, they sometimes talk about the people they used to be. Margaret mourns the loss of photo albums and family heirlooms, the the connections to parents and siblings that vanishing required them to sever. Frank grieves differently. For the victim of his teenage crime, for the life stolen not just from the convenience store owner but from his own family, for the decades of deception that led them to a choice no parent should have to make. But they survive. More than survive, they build something resembling happiness from the ashes of their former lives. Their children graduate high school, attend college, marry partners who never know about the underground passage that delivered their in-laws from one existence to another. The price of their vanishing is measured not in money or time, but in the complete erasure of everything they once were. No visits to Margaret's mother's grave. No high school reunions for Frank. No baby pictures to show their children's children. They become ghosts in their own lives, forever displaced from the world they left behind. And sometimes, in the small hours before dawn, Margaret wonders if the people they became were worth the price of the people they were forced to kill. The twisted metal frame in that forest clearing holds their answer. 4 lives that ended so 4 others could begin. A family's desperate love transformed into a mystery that will never be solved in the end. Perhaps that's the only victory available to those who choose to vanish. The knowledge that somewhere in the vast machinery of pursuit and capture, a single family found a way to slip through the cracks and emerge as something entirely new. Whether they found freedom or simply traded one prison for another remains a question without an answer, like the skeleton of a blue-striped RV rusting beneath an Oregon sky, holding its secrets until the end of time.